Welcome everyone to episode 19 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast, your sixth favorite podcast. Don't ask me what the first five are because they're probably weird things like true crime. This week, we actually have a really cool podcast, and we mentioned last week, it's all about topwater baits for bass. Like, we're in literally bass season right now.
Yep.
Like, I know people are fishing for other things, but bass season is exciting for a lot of us. So I thought we'd talk about me and Andrew's favorite topwater lures. Favorite. And there's so many topwater lures, but we're going to focus on 6 of them.
Like 17 and a half of them.
We would like to thank our sponsor this week, Adam Merrifield from Say Doggy Fishing. And he's actually donated something pretty cool. It's a unique giveaway that we've never had. It's actually a book. And he's actually donated 3 books, which is pretty cool. And we're going to get into that in a second.
Cool.
But first, what do we have, Andrew?
We have the Triple T.
Triple T. And like I say, Andrew hates it. I love it. And if you're not aware, Triple T stands for Techniques to Try.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just try and forget that whole thing.
We actually, this is the first time ever we are not doing an interesting fishing fact because Andrew actually has an in-depth Triple T. So
Somewhat in depth. Like, it might take like 30 seconds. I'm just kidding.
Go ahead. Is it topwater related?
Part of it is.
Ooh.
Primarily, I would say it is.
You might get good grades for that.
Ooh. So, it is called dead sticking. Now, it's something that I know I have talked about before on the episode, on the podcast. I know that, how familiar are you? I know you're familiar with it, but how often do you use this technique, Jesse?
I am not a patient man, so not very often.
And how often do I use this technique?
All the time. Sometimes I'll wait for hours as Andrew's just standing there looking at his lure.
And how many times have I fished you with it?
It's happened.
So, it's one of those things where it definitely has its place to keep in your fishing toolbox, essentially, of techniques. And I learned about it a long time ago by reading fishing books. Is when I had first heard about it.
You read books?
I used to.
Well, you're going to read this new one.
I might start again.
Yeah, I actually read it. It's good. But anyway, we're going to go into that.
So, dead sticking, for those of you who don't know, is when you pause your bait. Now, it primarily happens with, let's say, a topwater. So this is a spook. So you're walking the dog, so you cast out, and all of a sudden you stop. Awkward silence. And you wait. And you can wait, 2 seconds. You can wait 10 seconds. There are some, the first time I heard about it, I was reading about an experience where this guy was told by the guide, go up in front of this waterfall, cast out with this bait, and do nothing for 30 seconds. And the guy's like, that's stupid. Went up there, was fishing around, and then remember what the guide said, put on the lure, cast out, did nothing. And the bass were nailing this bait. That's just what worked in that spot. So I'm like, you know what? I have to try it, give this a try. So the pause is what does it. And they will strike after 10 seconds. They will do it. You don't have to. Now, again, you keep working. No strike happens. You keep working it. Another 4 or 5 feet. Stop again. Let it sit. So it started off as being a presentation for topwater baits. You don't have to leave it there, though. So when we talked before about drop shotting, one of the biggest things is don't move. Like, try not to overwork that bait at all. So when it's sitting there, that's technically you're dead sticking it. When you're not moving your rod, trying to stay as still as possible, you're dead sticking. And that really works well on that presentation. So as soon as you go below the surface, you have jerk baits. So again, it's a pause retrieve in your retrieve. If you let it sit there, a suspending jerk bait, for even longer, you're dead sticking that jerk bait. So don't be afraid to let those pauses linger, because there are times where the fish aren't very active. And where this really comes into play is to have something that is a finesse approach with larger baits. So especially if I'm using like the spider lure or the dragonfly, they have a fairly large profile on the surface of the water, or if I'm fishing, like I said, a jerk bait underneath, they have a pretty large profile still. But as soon as you pause and let it sit, you'll have a bass come over or a pike, whatever, they'll come up and just stare at it and not move. And before you start working that bait again, they might stare at it for like 10 seconds and then just kind of like come up and just put it in their mouth. And you'll just see them grab it. So you're not going to feel the strike, but all of a sudden you have a fish on. So that's the kind of thing where it's a finesse presentation without needing any special gear, without changing any of your rigs, your lures, your rod reel, nothing. All you have to do is pause a little bit longer. So that's something that, again, Jesse always says I'm a patient guy. I love using this technique. It works really well with us when we fish together because Jesse is more of a power fisherman, so he's fishing a frog, a walking bait, whatever, on the surface of the water, and for a long time I was fishing in the back of the boat, so I'm fishing behind him to fish a more finesse approach, a slower approach, had a big advantage for me to be able to catch those fish because they clearly didn't go for the active retrieve.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's my little triple T about dead sticking, and it's not only about topwater baits, but feel free to give it a try on whatever you're using. Let the pause do the work for you.
That's a good tip. And just to add one little story, this is, I think, one of the reasons I became a believer of this technique is because when I was fishing one time and I whipped out a really far cast with a spook or a walking bait, and I legit got a huge backlash. I don't know what I was just like, I just got a big backlash, right? So my lure was like 100 feet from the boat and it was just floating there. And I'm just pulling line out of my reel. I was like, oh man, what an idiot, it's pulling my line out. And all of a sudden, boom, a bass smashed it. So I just started reeling all all the coils of line, started reeling it and I actually caught the fish. And that thing was sitting there for like 30 seconds, just sitting there. And this fish must have just swam up to it, thought it was just some, injured bait fish or a dead bait fish, just came up and smoked it.
And it's effective because in nature, you'll see a lot of things try to stay hidden in plain sight by not moving.
Yeah.
So it's a very natural presentation when you look at it. Because how many times have you seen where you throw a frog in the water and he like kicks twice and then just sits there for like a minute? That's completely normal for that to happen.
Exactly.
So it's
a great technique. And I remember that Bob Azumi fishing book, the Bob Azumi's fishing tips.
Yes.
There's a whole chapter in that book about dead sticking.
Yeah.
And it is a technique. And I think it's one of those techniques that maybe younger anglers have never heard of.
Yeah,
it's more old school, but it definitely is effective. And maybe the fish in your lake, they haven't seen it in a while. So definitely try that, especially in pressured water.
Yeah. And the two baits I love doing it the most with, they are topwater. So the one is the live target spider.
Yeah.
I think it's live target. So, which we had a giveaway, I think our second or third episode, that was a giveaway. And what I'll do is I'll cast it underneath a tree and just let it sit for a count of 10 seconds without moving it after the cast, as if it just fell out of that tree or off that dock. And then I'll just do a couple turns in the reel and it just pulls forward a bit and then stops. And I'll do that. I'll pull it maybe 3 times and I'm fishing a very concentrated pocket of water and then reel in, cast again somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And the other lure is the piku piku, which is super finesse and it's a wacky rigged
cool
hard
lure.
bait minnow.
Jackal.
But then, and you cast the thing out and again, I let it sit. Nothing. And a lot of the strikes will happen after that initial cast, that first splash, and then nothing. And then when I don't get a strike there, I'll just twitch the rod to a bit and it just quivers. Exact same spot, doesn't move. It quivers, the ripples go out, it's dead calm again. 10 seconds later, boom, this bass will come up and nail it. It's a very interesting approach. Yeah. And it's like I said,
I think some people don't understand how aware of their surroundings fish are.
Yeah.
They have lateral lines. They can feel movement, even minute movements on the surface, they can feel. And if something drops into their area, they know it's there. And they're curious. Bass are curious animals. They're going to go up to it and be like, what's this? And they don't have hands. They can't just feel it. They feel with their mouth. And oftentimes that's how you hook them.
Yeah.
So that's a cool technique.
Yeah. And another thing too, I was going to mention with that is you have, like, how many times have you casted into a spot and all of a sudden you see the bass like scurry away? And then they'll come back 30 seconds later to their spot, right?
Yeah.
They'll spook the fish. With an approach like this, if you were casting out retrieve, cast out retrieve, every time you cast it out, that bass leaves that spot, you retrieve, he comes back, your bait's gone. So if you cast out and you had let that sit, I'm not saying it's going to work every time, by no means. But if that bait is still sitting there, they got spooked, they're like, oh no, they come back 30 seconds later, and there's a supernatural presentation of something sitting above where their little residences at this time.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, I hate that there.
Yeah.
Time to kill it.
They're territorial. Yeah. And I think that's oftentimes what bass do. They have their log or their area and anything that's there, they're like, no, that I'm going to, they may not be hungry. Like I've seen video footage of bass sucking up bluegill and literally spitting them out somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, they're not even hungry. They're just like, get out of my area. Right. So that's cool. That's a cool triple T. I know Andrew hates triple T, but I love it. So we're going to keep on doing it. We have a giveaway from Adam Merrifield, and he actually has a book, like we mentioned. And he's actually giving away 3 of these books.
Nice.
And the book is actually pretty cool because it's all about smallmouth bass fishing. And this is a cool, like, I read this book. He mailed a copy to me a few weeks ago. I had opportunity to read it. It's called Mighty Smallmouth, Catching Big Bass on Small Water. This whole book is about catching smallmouth bass on river systems generally.
Nice.
But like the information you could definitely apply to lakes as well. And I'm just going to go through some of the chapters just so like if you win this book, or it's on Amazon as well, if you want to download the book or buy it for someone, it's a really good book. So just as a little bit of a history, Adam, who wrote this book, he is an avid river smallmouth angler. If you follow him on Instagram, we'll put that link to his Instagram in the show notes below. You can tell that this guy loves smallmouth bass fishing, and he catches giants. Like, you know, some people they're just totally faking it. This guy's not. His Instagram is full of pictures of big smallmouth bass. I'm always jealous. I'm like, what? Where'd he catch that? And I'm trying to look in the background. There's no way I could find out. But anyway, so he published this book, and he said that this book was years in the making.
I believe it.
And you can tell it's thick. Like, I can't even imagine writing this much. Oh my goodness. And it turned out really good. So he fishes a lot. He told me in the Grand River area, and also up in the French River as well. Both rivers are fantastic for smallmouth bass. So he wrote this book, and he said he wrote this for the average angler. So I'm like, he wrote it for me. He wrote it for the average angler. And if you look through this book, there's literally no references to like bass boats or panoptics or fancy electronics.
That's awesome.
He literally wrote this book. In my opinion, it's a book that it keeps everything simple, and it's literally about the simplicity of catching big smallmouth bass. That's literally what it's about. There's nothing crazy. It teaches bass behavior. He goes into like bass behavior. He goes into like all this like really like not in depth, but like scientific reasons, like why bass are going to be in this area, what time of the year is good to catch this fish. It's in depth. Mm-hmm. Like it's literally not just like, oh, fish here and fish there. It's like he breaks down specific spots and when it's good to fish for them. And I'm just going to show you the table of contents, some of the stuff, how in depth this is. So he goes into water access, what kind of equipment to use. And then when he's talking about bass, he talks about the seasons, which time of year you can fish for them, their behavior, and then he goes into spring, summer, fall. And he literally goes through those seasons. Like, this is how to catch fish this time of year. This is where they're going to be. This is how they're behaving.
Because you often don't get that broken down as to the seasons, because there's a huge difference as to the location and techniques that are going to be most effective during those times.
100%. And then this book is about river fishing, so there's a lot of information about fishing for smallmouth bass in lakes. Mm-hmm. Say you want to fish a river, he goes into it as like, hey, here are the fishable features of rivers. Here's how to understand the river. Like I grew up trout fishing, so I understand rivers, but a lot of people don't. They don't understand how to fish current.
Even growing up fishing the cottage, we were fishing pike and we were fishing bass on the river.
Yeah. So he talks all about like, you know, where to find fish, like pools, bends, plunge pools, current seams, eddies, hard structure, soft structure, transitions, overhangs, undercuts, shade, exposure. Like he goes into
each one of those is a chapter,
and it's a lot of information. And I thought one of the cool things about this book is he describes how to find active bass, which I'm all about. Like, yeah, you can finesse fish that aren't biting, but he's talking about finding active bass, finding the forage, following the birds. That's a good tip.
Yep.
Moon phases, weather conditions, and then he gets into lures. We're going to get into this during our topic, this podcast about topwaters, but he goes into all the lures that he uses. And I noticed that the lures that he chose, they're classics. Mm-hmm. He doesn't go crazy. Like, he's not talking about all these, you know, high dollar lures. He's talking the basic lures you need to catch bass, and they've been working since the beginning of time. Well, not since Noah was on the earth and flooded, you know, it's chucking poppers, but like in modern history.
He sent out the crow and also cast out a jitterbug.
And, you know, it's very practical, this book, okay? And I'm saying this because I think that if you're interested in this topic of fishing for smallmouth bass in rivers, I 100% would recommend this book. I read it. It was great. The cool thing is that he talks about adapting your approach, finding spots on satellite maps. I get lots of questions about that. Like, how do you do it? Well, he has a whole area in this book about finding fishing spots on maps, overlook community holes, new structure, changing habitats. It's amazing. And if you look at Adam's Instagram, you notice that he actually fishes out of a canoe a lot.
That's awesome.
He's super simple. He keeps it basic. Guy slams fish. And this guy, he has such a knowledge of, you can tell from this book. When you're reading a book and you're like, okay, this is kind of boring. But this guy, you can tell that he eats, breathes, and sleeps smallmouth. And there's lots of pictures of big bass in here. I'm kind of jealous.
It reminds me a lot of the scientific angler books I grew up reading, which were outdated when I was young even.
Yeah.
But like you said, like he keeps it simple. Because I remember there's sections in there, like even looking at the scientific angler for bass, for smallmouth or for largemouth, and it's like, oh, it talks about the thermocline and oxygen levels and the temperature and all this stuff. I'm like, I don't have anything that will actually tell me any of this information that apparently I need to know.
Yeah.
So it's nice when it's just broken down, like, look, here's something that you can just kind of lick your finger, point in the air, and be like, these are what I know.
Yeah.
And use those to your that information to your advantage. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I would highly recommend that. Again, he does sell this on his Amazon. We'll put a link to his bio in there. Definitely check him out on Instagram too. We'll put links to all this in our show notes. So he's actually giving away 3 of these books. I'm actually going to let Andrew borrow this one so he can read it. He can finish it. He started it, but I stole it. So what can I say? But he's giving away 3 copies, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that giveaway coming up.
Nice.
But I thought, because we're doing a topwater bass book, I found the spot here when he's talking about lures for bass. Now, he goes through a lot of lures that,
I own that one. Yeah. I own that one.
Yeah,
and
classic, hair jigs, twister tail jigs, crankbaits, topwaters. But I thought we could kind of look at his view on topwater lures. And I thought it was funny. It says topwater lures, and it says presentation, and it says it floats. So this is funny. Not funny. This is interesting. It says, if you were to ask 100 anglers their favorite way to catch smallmouth bass, 99 of them would tell you topwater lures are the most exciting, heart-pounding way to get a bite.
It is.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I love catching bass in general.
It's not the most effective, but it's the most exciting.
Yeah.
That's true. Yep.
He says, of all the lures, topwaters have to be the most innovative with the greatest variety, both in purpose and in configuration. And then he goes into different baits. He goes over poppers, walking baits, prop baits, wake baits, and a bunch of other techniques how to catch them. So I thought we could kind of cover that with some of our favorite baits that we have here. And we're talking, this book is about smallmouth. We're going to kind of cover largemouth and smallmouth because, maybe you fish largemouth, maybe you fish smallmouth. They're similar.
The thing is, I've noticed I can't really target one species over the other with my topwaters. I'll be like, well, this one has 3 treble hooks. I'll more use that if I know there's smallmouth in the area because it's a better hookup percentage. But I don't expect either fish to really hit a topwater, whatever it is, more than the other species would.
Yeah.
If you're casting where there's bass, whatever style of bass, they're going to hit it.
It may depend on the lake, right?
Yeah.
So I thought we could start with one of my favorites is poppers. Remember the old classic like hula poppers?
Oh,
we all have a hula popper. Yeah. We're going to kind of go through some of the poppers that we like. And for me, for me, a topwater, when it comes to fishing a popper, it's all about targets.
Yeah.
It's not a bait that I'm going to cover large areas with. It's a target-oriented bait. Like I'm going to cast beside a dock or like beside, a stump, something like that. It's not a bait that I'm going to go down and be like, I've got to cover this whole shoreline and I'm going to tie in a popper. No, it's a slower bait, but that makes it really effective. What is one of we're going to go through some poppers first, then we'll talk about how we fish them. What's one of your favorite poppers?
So this is one actually Jesse bought me a couple years ago. This is the Mega Bass
Pop Max.
Now,
this is a primo popper.
So this is a half ounce. This is the largemouth bass color or baby bass color. And I've caught a bunch of fish on this. Yeah. In fact, I've even caught myself.
Yeah. Andrew hooked himself last year.
This treble specifically is the one that Jesse had to rip out of my hand for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome.
But I love it. Like, yes, it is. Oh, I almost did it again. So I do like it a lot because one, it came with really good quality hooks, but it has some like the gill rakers that comes through that it splashes water, extra splash, all these little things about it that makes it a premium popper.
Yeah.
But it does cast really well.
It
really
walks.
good hookup percentage. It walks as you pop, which is amazing.
So if you don't know what walking is, so most poppers, you cast them out and you just, tug on your rod and bloop, it pops or bloops, kind of like, displaces all the water around it. Another way to fish a popper is to walk it, much like a walking bait, like a Zara spook or something. But you obviously have to use a lot shorter twitches because it's such a short bait. But you can actually walk it, and it basically just the head zigzags back and forth.
And they stay pretty close. You can cover very little water, so it really focuses in one area.
So say like you're fishing around a stump, and you want to have that popper in the area, but working for a longer period of time. Instead of popping it through that area, you can kind of walk it in place.
Yep. Now,
you can walk probably almost every popper, but some just walk way better than others. And I know this is an expensive bait, the Mega Bass Pop Max. I think it's like $23-24. It's definitely a premium bait, but it walks really good.
It does.
And if you really like a topwater bait, I don't see a problem with spending, $23-24 on a bait. Yeah. Instead of buying 2 cheap poppers, buy one nice one.
As a rule of thumb, I do not cast this when there's pike around.
No.
This is limited to a bass only, or bass and walleye lake.
This is like treat yourself kind of lure.
Yeah.
Now, speaking about walking baits that aren't as expensive, another one that I'm a big fan of is the Evergreen. They don't even have names. The Evergreen. It's like the Evergreen OB68. It's just the Evergreen popper. It's a little bit more of a smaller package. I think it's like 3/8 of an ounce. This thing is a little cheaper. It's still a high-end bait. I think these are like $17-18. The reason I like spending a little bit more on a popper is because I want that bait to walk like crazy. They cast far, and the hooks are literally like, you look at these hooks and you bleed. Like, the fish grabs it and it's hooked 100%. That one I caught a muskie on last year on this little tiny popper. But if you want a bait that walks really good and you're like, I don't want to spend $25, that's stupid. I agree with you. One bait that you have to get, and these came out last year, the Spro Essential Series pop. It's called the E-Pop 80. It's more of a longer cigar-shaped style body. It's got premium Gamakatsu hooks. It's feathered treble. They come in a bunch of, it's the Essential Series. It's their basic series. I think this was $8.99.
That's awesome.
It was cheap. It's very loud. Like, it's a loud popper. It walks so good for a $9 bait. Like, I'm not joking. Awesome. If I could only have this popper, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
That's another really cool popper, and I've been super happy with it. It's been really good.
Another one that I got because I like the brand. This is a creek chub. I think it's called the Knucklehead.
Yeah.
And it actually has a segmented head, which just gives an extra, like, knock noise along with the big ball bearings in it. So it's got like the classic like hooks on it still, the silvered hooks, like nickel plated. But this thing here is a different action than some other poppers, but it also is a fair bit longer. Like, it's a pretty big for a popper.
Yeah.
But I wanted something a little bit different, so this is something else that I keep in my tackle box because I like to toss this one, and it's classic red head color.
Yeah.
But I got it on a whim. But I actually do like it. I haven't been able to walk the dog too well with it, but again, I haven't used it in a while, to be honest.
To try this year.
But it does pop really well. And I got it mainly for the profile and the size.
Yeah, I think that would be really good for pike too.
I have caught on it, 100%.
Yeah. Another popper, and I know people are probably thinking of their favorite popper. They're like, wow, these guys are stupid. They don't know about this crazy popper.
I lost mine and never bought one of those again.
This is the classic. This is a Rebel Pop R.
Yep.
I've caught so many fish on a Rebel Pop R, it's stupid. And I'll tell you, they're great baits. These have been around for decades. They don't cast very far. I generally like to use poppers that have like a modern popper that has like a better weight transfer system kind of thing in it. I do like a Pop R. They're classic. They catch fish. Generally speaking, it's not the first popper I'm going to pick up, but they smash. A lot of old timers will have a hula popper. A lot of people still use hula poppers. They're great. Any popper is good.
Oh, there's your little shower blows.
Yeah. I'm actually going to talk about that in the walking baits because it's kind of a combo bait there.
So this is more of a walking bait that pops rather than a popping bait that walks.
Yeah. So my tip for poppers would be fish a popper like a popper, but if you spend a little bit more money on a premium popper or find a budget one that walks very well, walking a popper, it's like this cool middle zone between a walking bait and popping because you can actually cover water with it.
Yeah.
As well. So say you're fishing a popper and you're going along the bank, there's a stump, slow it down, walk it through there. Or you get to another spot, just fiercely pop it through there. Like it gives you options of how to work that bait without having to change it up. So poppers are fantastic. I personally like poppers more for smallmouth, but they smash largemouth too.
Yeah.
But that's one bait. Okay, the next bait I thought we could talk about is the classic ploppers. like the Whopper Plopper or the Berkeley Chopo. I think like every company has their version of like the Whopper Plopper.
It got big probably a dozen years ago or so down in the States in the tournaments. And now it's blown up just like most of the bass that see them.
Yeah. So the Whopper Plopper, everyone will say the Whopper Plopper is the original. It's technically not the original. The guy that designed the Whopper Plopper, there was actually musky prop baits decades before the Whopper Plopper became popular. But the Whopper Plopper is the most popular original bass size one.
It's indicative of the classic buzzin' toad or buzzin' frog.
The Rebel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, this is more a buzzbait blade, but it's a pretty similar principle to the prop baits.
Yeah. And prop baits are great. I have two right here in my hand. These are actually both like similar size. This is the Whopper Plopper and this is the Berkeley Chopo, which I'd say are probably the two most popular ones. We'll get into which one I prefer after, but to fish a plopper, it's one of those surface lures that if anyone, like I said last week, when I worked at the tackle shop, someone's like, I'm just fishing. I don't know how to fish. I just need a few lures. Yeah. When I'm picking a topwater for them, it's a Berkeley Chopo. It's a Berkeley Chopo, like the 3.5, 4-inch size. I'm just like, literally, how do you fish it? Well, cast it out, reel it in. That's literally, you don't have to worry about, pausing or anything like that. Like you can do that, but they're equally effective if you straight retrieve. Just cast them out, let them hit the water, reel them in. Like just find that good speed where you hear it plopping and the bass just go unhinged for them. They don't just suck them down. They smash them.
Yeah, when you get a hit on that, you know it.
It's honestly my theory that sometimes the bass don't hit it because they're hungry. I think they hit it because it annoys the heck out of them. Like it's in their area and they're like, what the heck is that? They look up and there's this thing just literally being super noisy, just plopping by. And they're like,
a miniature boat. I can kill that one.
Yeah. But they're so effective and they're great for smallmouth and largemouth. Yeah. And you can get all kinds of sizes. Like Whopper Plopper makes like little tiny ones all the way to the big musky size ones. But when it comes to, have you ever owned an actual Whopper Plopper?
No.
Okay. No. For me, I always bought the Berkeley one because I'm cheap. I'm not cheap. I just bought a $25 popper. But when I see two things that are similar, I like to try them both and see if the Whopper Plopper is actually worth the extra money. So if you go to your local store, you can get a Chopo for literally $10 less than a Whopper Plopper.
Yeah.
And if you look at them side by side, you're like, okay, they look very similar. Which one do I buy? And there's some people that are like, oh, I wouldn't use a Berkeley Chopo. It's a cheap knockoff. And then there's people that are like, I don't want to spend $10 extra on the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I bought both of them. I've been using Chopos for probably 5 years now.
And this is like saving money. Just get both.
Yeah, get both. It's nice to know the difference. Yeah, now, I'd have to say the quality is probably a little better on the Whopper Plopper. They are $10 more. This one I bought is the big. It's the one that's just below the musky size.
Yeah,
it was $25, and the Berkeley one is like $12.99. Like there's a difference. That's a big difference. I could almost buy two of the Chopos. The Chopos for me, I actually prefer the sound to them.
Yep.
I prefer almost everything about them. I do think that the hooks on them are slightly too small. I'd like to upgrade the hooks to a slightly bigger size. But if you want to get into prop bait fishing, buy a Berkeley Chopo, in my opinion. They're way cheaper and they catch just as many fish.
And if you get excited about the prop baits and you want to get a bit more bougie, then get the Whopper Plopper.
Yeah, and they do have a slightly different sound to them. I do find that the Chopo actually has a more pronounced plop to it. That's just my opinion. But I've used both. They both catch fish. They're fantastic baits for bass. Mm-hmm. And really, if you get the bigger size, not the musky size, it's a really good finesse musky size.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've caught a few musky on this particular one. It's a little bit up. But yeah, ploppers are great. And we're going to talk now about walking baits. And I know Andrew's excited because
I love
walking baits too. Yeah. So a little history. We talked about this before. For the longest time, we both owned walking baits.
I owned this one.
Yeah.
This was my first one I ever owned.
And I think one of the first baits I ever bought was a Zara Spook.
Yep.
And I bought it because in every fishing book that I owned, like YouTube wasn't a thing back then, everyone always wrote about the Zara Spook. It's like, oh, you need a Zara Spook or a walking bait. They're classic. So I bought one and I went fishing and I just cast it out and reeled it in. And I'm like, it doesn't do anything. So I was a kid. I didn't know you had to walk the dog with it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, you're reeling in this bait, and like I had jitterbugs and stuff. When you reel those in, they're pop, 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 they're plopping along. You reel in a Zara Spook, it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Same with you, right?
For years I thought this was such a waste of money. This is the dumbest bait ever. Nothing's ever hit it. I saw one fish hit one. My brother cast it out, and he casts, hits the water, and gets a blow up, misses the fish. I'm like, okay, well, that was just a fluke. Anything that hit the water, he would have hit. So clearly these baits don't mean anything. That was my thought on it for a long time.
Yeah. So eventually, long story short, many years ago, I said to myself, you know what? I got to figure out how to do this, you know? So I went and I looked up some YouTube videos, and they were explaining how to do it. So I went out, and once you get the mechanics down of how to do it, it's super easy.
It's not
honestly
hard.
I could teach anyone to do it, even a kid, in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Easy.
This is easier than jig fishing to me.
Oh,
like
100%.
You can see the action of the bait. You know how effective it is. Jig fishing, this is probably the first year I've gained any confidence in jig fishing, to be honest. Like
Jig fishing
I
is
don't
tough
have
when you
a
first
lot of
start.
confidence in jigs because I had a hard time visualizing what the bait was doing, and I was overworking it, essentially. That's what I've been doing for a long time. But this, you can see what it's doing because it's on the top of the water. So you can see where your mistakes are and fix it. So within 20 minutes of you starting to learn, you're going to be 95% there of being a pro at walking the dog.
Yeah, for sure. So walking baits, for me, like I said, with poppers, it's more of a target thing.
Yeah.
Walking baits is the opposite for me. Not to say that you can't chuck a walking bait beside a dock or a stump. It'll work. And like Andrew said before, you could dead stick it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's covering water. And for covering water, I just want to bomb a walking bait out really far and then just work it back fast. Because smallmouth like chasing.
Yes.
I found that. Like they like chasing, and sometimes the speed triggers them to actually attack. Same with muskie. You ever see them like just burning in bucktails really fast, and you're like, no fish is gonna hit that. They chase it. They love it.
Yeah.
It triggers a reaction, like a bite. They just have to swim up and nail it. And I find with smallmouth sometimes you'll be reeling it in really fast, and they'll come up and swim up and nail it and miss it. And then 5 feet, you keep working the bait. 5 feet later, they go up and nail it again. They miss it. They go up and nail it. Like I've had fish like 4 or 5 times miss the same bait. But if you slow down, they won't touch it.
Another thing I really like about, so again, this is the Head and Czar spook is classic and still inexpensive to this day. And the thing I like about this, and most walking baits, I would say, they're very buoyant.
Yes.
So this is probably the go-to topwater that I use when there are pike in the area and I am concerned about getting bit off, because I'll fish these with a leader. It makes it a little bit more difficult to walk. Not hard. And I'll fish like a 100-pound fluoro to 12-inch fluoro leader on the thing.
It'll still walk.
Or a 12-inch wire leader, and you can still walk the dog. And I'll be bass fishing with it primarily, but I'll tell you, one of my favorite things to do is now, after accidentally getting so many strikes from like pike, you have a 24-inch pike just come out of the water as you're walking the dog, and it hits this thing, misses 7 times in a row, and then finally gets hooked.
Yeah.
This thing's like shooting out of the water at like Mach 17, doing cartwheels. It's the funnest experience you're gonna have walking the dog, is with a bunch of pike going mad over it.
Yeah. I remember some guy on Instagram was like, oh, pike don't hit spooks. And I was like, really? That's weird. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the spooks. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see, and I know Andrew always gets nervous when I put my hand on it. This whole table that we're talking on right now.
You didn't slam it down this time.
Yeah, well,
because
these
there's a bunch
sharp.
of Japanese hooks on the table.
We got tons of surface lures on this table. So Andrew has the spook there.
Yep.
To add to that, one of my favorite topwaters is it's the Super Spook Junior.
Yep.
So it's literally the same as a Zero Spook. It's just slightly smaller. And I find this size, I think it's like 1/2 ounce instead of like 5/8 or 3/4 or whatever. It is great for smallmouth. It's great for largemouth. It's one of the baits that it's slightly smaller, so you can actually fish it really effectively on spinning gear. And it's not so small. It's not like a little tiny bait.
Yeah.
It's still a decent sized bait. It's like 3.5 inches long. It casts a mile. They're very aerodynamic, and it catches tons of fish. That size is the one I'm generally going to start with, especially if I'm fishing for smallmouth. But speaking of smallmouth, if I'm going to start with smallmouth, one of our favorite walking baits is the Rapala Skitter Walk.
Yes.
And
the Skitter V, which is the updated version, walks even easier.
Yeah.
And casts a mile.
And these are small. I think they're only like 3 inches long.
Yeah.
2 treble hooks, and they're small. They cast a mile, especially on spinning gear.
Yeah.
They cast a mile, and they're just like a small, compact little snack.
Yeah. They got rattles inside. It's nice.
They're good. Another really good bait. I have to give a shout out to my our friend Dangle Baits. Yeah.
I got one. It's not the same bait, but it's also by Dangle Baits. This is kind of like mimicking the Sammy
Yeah.
walking bait. But
he painted these. We got these at CanCast. This is it's the same size as the Super Spook Junior that I had.
Yep.
But he has this really cool like bleeding bass zombie paint job.
Yeah.
That guy's I don't know how he does it. He's an artist.
I love his paint jobs.
If I had to paint baits, your options would be black and white. That's it. It wouldn't be like zombie frog. But shout out to Carson at Dangle Baits. He does fantastic stuff. If you go to CanCast next year, definitely stop at his booth, and he has some fantastic baits.
Yeah.
And it says Dangle on the bottom, so you know it's gonna work.
And this one too. This one is like wood color. It looks like a stick. I love it.
Kind of like a mouse almost.
Yeah, so it's got like a
he literally just dropped that and hooked it on his shorts. Ooh, that was close.
It didn't go past the barb, I'm all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got some, like, it's not just brown, but it's got some really good colors. And again, all of his baits come with
primo
good hooks and also his hand-tied skirts. I should say most of his baits come with the hand-tied like treble, but his treble hooks, his tied treble hooks are amazing.
They're very nice.
Especially like we've bought a few
to put 5 or 6 packs of them.
Yeah. Just the feathered trebles to put on different baits. And I love, like, you'll see a lot of the top waters, they have feathered trebles, and that's because especially I notice when I'm dead sticking and that hook hangs down and all this is just sitting there, and this is kind of like what you do with the drop shot is very finesse, and it's just kind of like sitting there, and it has barely any movement, but any like movement in the water, any current, any wind blowing the bait, all the feathered treble just kind of like moves a bit, and that's where they're going to hit. When it's dead sticking, they find they hit the feathered treble.
Yep, 100%. And a few other baits that I've had good success with, because we went through a phase where we loved walking baits, so I just every time I went to the fishing store, I picked up a different brand.
Yep.
And I've come to like certain ones. There's tons of them on the market, but one that I did really good on, especially for smallmouth, like we said, smallmouth sometimes they'll swing and miss so many times. Like they love chasing. So not that I like using baits with 3 treble hooks if I can get away with it, but if I'm missing fish, there's a cool walking bait called the Berkeley Hijacker. It's not a full size spook bait. It's slightly smaller, but it has 3 treble hooks on it. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of the bigger baits have 3 treble hooks. This is probably the smallest walking bait I could find that had 3. And it's a fantastic bait. Did really good for that.
Yep.
And one last one that I'd recommend to anyone is the Yo-Zuri 3DB pencil. This thing is flat out just, if I could only have one, I would not be mad at all if it was this one. It's the smaller one. There's a big one. There's like a 5-inch one. This is, I think, the 3.5 or 3 3/4 inch one. Has good rattles in it. It's more like a ball in there. It's like dum, dum, dum. But they're fantastic. Every company makes a good walking bait.
Yeah. There's a new version, so if you really didn't want to take the effort to learn how to walk the dog, which again recommend you 100% do,
you should.
There's a new bait it was released last year at the ICAST, is the Z-Man Hellraiser. And so this one, it doesn't feel like a topwater. Like this thing weighs for like 5/8 of an ounce, maybe 3/4, probably 5/8.
It doesn't float though.
No, so it doesn't float. But the eye connection is right underneath this huge flat lip, and then it has this huge weight with the blade on the back end of it. And so when you reel it in, that blade's just swinging around, and this whole thing's just like rattling back and forth on the top of the water. So it's a constant retrieve. You can't pause it. But this is a great like cast retrieve bait that's going to walk the dog on its own. And I haven't used much of it because I only was able to get it in the fall of last year.
Yeah,
it was the first time I saw it in the store.
It's going to smash smallmouth.
So I didn't use it for any bass fishing last year, and I haven't been out enough this year to fish topwaters yet for him. So
yeah,
but I'm excited to try this.
That's kind of like in a category of its own.
Yeah,
it's not really a walking bait. It's not really a prop bait.
It is featured as a walking bait by Z-Man because it's essentially walking the dog.
Yeah,
but
it's caused by the weird flipping blade.
Yeah,
it's very unique.
Yeah, anyways, that's something cool. I'm excited to try, but it's another option there for you.
Oh, for sure. And last bait, I really didn't want to not talk about this one. This is a very unique bait. This is the Evergreen Shower Blows. Yeah. Interesting name.
And that's a nice small one too.
There's 2 sizes. I originally bought the large size.
Yep.
And it's basically, imagine a thin walking bait with a bulbous tail, but it has a popper face.
Yeah. A small popper face.
A small popper face, okay? I caught lots of fish on the big one. I recently got the small one, which is, I'd say it's like, less than 3 inches? It's tiny. And this one, for me, this is a smallmouth bait. But the cool thing about these kind of baits is they walk really good, but they just have that little bit of an extra spray as you're walking. As the face is, zigzagging back, it's spraying more water. It's called a shower blows. It's just showering water everywhere. And it's a small bait. It's very finessey, but you can make this thing spit.
Yeah.
It's spit. And I just got the small one this year, and I'm really excited to try this for smallmouth.
And you look at the design of that lip, it kind of comes out in the side more than the top and bottom. So with a popper that you're popping in towards you straight, you look at the face of it, and it's cupped more so vertically.
Yeah.
Because you're pulling it forward, so it's catching that water, throwing it forward. That one's not designed to catch water and throw it forward. It's designed as you walk the dog, it's swishing its face to the side and throwing it sideways.
Yeah.
So that's why that lip is actually horizontal, and that's why it is designed for walking the dog. It's not a straight retrieve popper.
Yeah. And really cool bait. Again, Evergreen is one of those companies. Cool, it's a little bougie. It's a little expensive. So instead of, say, spending $12 on a popper, you're spending $17, $18. The difference is the paint jobs are amazing. I don't think that matters as much, but they have really good
long range casting.
They cast so far. And like when it comes to topwater, I'd rather spend an extra $5 on a bait that I can cast literally 30% farther. And the hooks that come on it, sharp.
And so they're really sharp hooks. What I will say, and a lot of people don't realize, is the evergreen. Some of the evergreen baits, even their jerk baits, are designed for finesse or more finesse. So it's thinner gauge hooks. They're incredibly sharp, yes, but just knock your drag down a couple notches when you're using them, because the hooks, they are not designed to be fished the same as a heavier gauge topwater, like the old Czar spooks with these like thick hooks.
Yeah, exactly.
They are thinner hooks, but they are sticky sharp. So your hookup ratio is amazing. Just don't horse the fish in. That's all.
Exactly. And one tip, not specific lure related, is upgrade your hooks. Yeah. So sometimes like I'll buy a bait, and some brands, like, their hooks are okay. Do yourself a favor, especially for topwaters, where like sometimes the hookup ratio is not the best. Buy some really nice hooks. I'm talking like Amagatsu or like Owner, something really sharp. Upgrade the hooks. You will notice a huge difference in your hookup percentage. Because like Andrew said, they're sticky sharp. The fish literally touches it or goes near it and it's hooked.
Yeah.
You don't want a fish to grab your lure after a day of fishing and finally get a fish to come up and grab your lure, and it literally, like, I've seen them grab it and just like spit it and shake their head, and the lure just flies out.
And some of the thicker hooks like this one on the Zara Spook, the Jitterbug, the Crazy Crawler, these are all head and baits. But a lot of the older topwaters, they have these like old thick style hooks, and what you can do is you can sharpen them to even sharper from factory.
Yeah,
it's a pretty good quality steel, especially the old ones. Amazing quality steel. So just make sure you keep them sharpened with just a hook sharpener. You can grab wherever.
Yeah.
And then you now, instead of having to just swap out the hooks with another brand, or spend $7 more to get a pack of treble hooks that are high quality, just sharpening them sometimes will make the difference.
100%. Always have a sharpener, like we do for muskie fishing. But even for bass fishing, like the last few years, I've had a little. Well, Andrew just got one too, but I have a little hook file. And sometimes you'll notice, not as much for topwater fishing, but especially like crankbaits or chatterbaits, you'll hit it against a rock and you'll look at your hook and it's like the tips just rolled over.
Yeah,
and
I had one that was like a ball on the end.
And few strokes on the sharpener quick, and boom, it's sharp as ever.
Yep.
Get back to fishing, catch fish. You don't want to hook a fish and just not actually get any penetration.
I've had experience with that, because I had my old Rattling Wrap. I still have it. I love that bait. My first Rattling Wrap I ever bought.
Yeah.
And it's like this blue minnow color.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
And so I still use it. Still catches lots of fish. And the front treble of it, one of the hook points was rolled over. It was like I said, it was like a ball on the top of that hook. But the rest, the 3 hook points in the back and the 2 remaining ones in the front treble, were perfectly fine, sticky sharp. And I missed probably 3 bass in one morning. And I'm like, why am I missing the bass? And I looked and I see this hook. I'm like, that's why. And I sharpened it. I didn't miss a single bass in that bait the rest of the day. So if you think, oh, it's just one hook point, it's fine, whatever, don't. The hook point that's rolled over is the one that's most pronounced.
That's why it's rolled over.
Exactly. Yeah. So make sure that all of your hook points are good, because I noticed that day 100% that single hook point made a big difference.
For sure. And one last tip I'll give you, and I was just talking to Andrew about this earlier. Sometimes I think on plopper style baits, like Berkeley Choppos, I feel like the hooks are too small. And I'm not saying put huge, massive hooks on it, but I've noticed sometimes that the hook on the back, especially the hook on the belly, it's tiny. Like I bought a Berkeley Chopo, the smaller size, and I missed so many fish.
Yeah.
Fish would blow up on it, and I was catching the odd one, and I was like, man, that hook just seems small. So I took it off, and I put a slightly bigger hook on it, and my hookup ratio went way up. So I'm not saying put huge hooks. You don't want to, like, be catching like all the weeds and crap or like snagging the fish too bad. But sometimes you just need to go up one size of hook, and you'll catch more fish.
And this isn't like a DIY, but like, oh, no one knows this trick. Only the pros do it. This is stock. I've cast it out once just to see what it looked like.
Yeah.
And you look at the size of the treble hooks on this. Like the back one is probably like a number 5, number 4 maybe.
Yeah.
And
The front one's like a 2.
yeah, like it's doubled in size.
Yeah.
And this is like stock from the factory, so it is a legit technique or purpose to have a larger treble on it if you can. If it's still, especially with these, with the floating ones, if it still supports that weight of it, that's great. You don't want to all of a sudden turn your surface lure into like a suspending bait.
A slow sink, yeah. But especially with prop baits, because they're a constant retrieve, even a slightly bigger hook, again, it's not going to really change. Going up one size isn't going to change the buoyancy, but even if it did slightly, it's fine because it's a cast and retrieve bait. You're going to reel it in anyway.
Or what I do, the other thing too to keep in mind is some of the baits, if you upsize the treble hooks, so for example on this Mega Bass one, if I went up one more size on these, the hook points could get tangled.
Yes. So
just keep in mind you don't want to go too big, but if you are going to upsize, one thing I like to do is I will go a size bigger in hook, but get the Gamakatsu is the one I know of. I have more confidence in it. The G Finesse.
They're thinner.
So they're thinner gauge, so they're as thin, perhaps even thinner than the original hooks that were on the bait, but a larger hook gap on it. So better hookup ratio, and again, there are finesse thickness, but they are still like really sturdy.
They're made
hooks.
of stronger steel.
Yeah. So those are the ones that I generally will try and find. Sometimes they go on sale. I'll grab like 4 packs, and I just have them so I can replace my hooks when I have to on them.
Yeah,
but that's something to do. I'll upsize,
I have so much
go
more
with a
confidence.
finesse hook so that it's not overweighting your bait.
Exactly. And I have so much more confidence with a better hook. That's oftentimes why I will spend more money on a better surface lure, especially surface lures, because when I'm chucking out a bait and I know that it has razor sharp hooks on it, I know if a fish grabs it, it's going to get hooked.
Yeah.
But it's a confidence thing as well. But if you do fish surface lures and you've never tried maybe a premium bait, try one this summer and see how you like it. You might be blown away by the performance. You might be one of those people that are like, you know what, that's crazy. I'd rather spend $5 on a $1 lure. That's fine.
If you're gonna go and buy 2 more budget baits, just try getting one that's a bit more expensive.
Yeah. So the next group of lures that we're going to talk about very briefly is buzzbaits. Now, I know a lot of you people are like, are you going to talk about frogs? No, because...
well, somewhat. This specific one singular.
Yeah. Next week's episode, or maybe the week after, we have a full episode on frog fishing. So we're not going to cover frogs at all this week.
Yeah.
But frogs
it's a topic unto itself, for sure.
You need a whole episode for that one. So I thought we could talk about buzzbaits quick. I love buzzbaits. Remember a few years in a row at Algonquin, I caught one of the bigger bass on the buzzbait. And it was
such a classic bait.
Oh, it's classic. They've been around forever. Yeah. This one I'm holding in my hand is actually a Blackfly Lures buzzbait. And see, I've actually bent it down so that the blade hits the arm and it just creates more noise. That's classic, the classic buzzbait noise. They're so noisy and obnoxious.
Yeah. Some have a little metal tab that will also like hang down and it clacking against the blade itself too. Like they're designed to be as noisy as possible.
Yeah, they're super obnoxious. And I think, again, a buzzbait is one of those baits that just annoys the fish into biting, especially largemouth. They're like, get out of my area, boom. And this lure is just like, just clacking by them. Yeah. And they're like, what the heck? It's also a fantastic night lure.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So I've seen a lot of people be like, what's the difference? Which one should I use? A buzzbait or a prop bait like a whopper plopper? Because essentially they do similar things. Mm-hmm. If I can get away with it, I'm going to use a plopper bait because there's 2 treble hooks. Then my odds of hooking the fish are significantly better.
Yes.
The problem with a prop bait, if you ever fish any lakes that have any weeds in them,
they have exposed treble hooks.
They have exposed treble hooks. And with a plopper, what happens is because there's a rotating prop on the back, any weed that it catches, it wraps around the body. Yeah. And as soon as that happens, the prop stops spinning.
It wraps into the shaft.
And then the whole bait starts spinning instead of just the tail. And then you have to go and pull the weeds out from underneath the hook, and it just becomes annoyance. So if you can get away with it in open water, a plopper or a chopo, whopper plopper is fantastic.
Especially if you're fishing those those wispy weeds that lay down on top of the water, and you're fishing those are the worst. They get tangled in everything.
They're the worst.
But the buzzbait
just
glides right over them.
You can cast a buzzbait because a buzzbait is basically like a spinnerbait. It has a wire like R-bend
Frame,
with a a buzzbait blade on it, but it has a single hook facing up. So it's not completely weedless, but you can literally cast this around lily pads, not in slop or thick, heavy weeds, but like anywhere like
through rice.
Yeah.
Is awesome.
Cattails, anything like that. And generally speaking, it's going to come back without anything on it. And for that reason, I feel like it's more versatile. You can cast a buzzbait in open water and smash fish on it.
Yep.
So if you're going down the bank and you have to either have a whopper plopper on or a buzzbait, generally speaking, logically, a buzzbait is more versatile because you can cast it at everything.
Yeah.
With a whopper plopper, you may have to cast and wait until there's an opening and cast and wait or pull weeds off.
Yeah.
A buzzbait, you're just like cast.
Right at the shore, over top of the weeds. Yeah.
And we've had fantastic days on buzzbaits, and for me, especially at night, it's been really good. And you know it's working because you just have to hear that noise, that the plopping or the buzzbaiting noise. I don't even know the right way to describe it.
The hits you get on a bait too, those bass, they kill it.
They don't just slurp it down; they smash it like they're trying to kill it.
Yeah.
So a buzzbait is
it's
great.
probably the biggest. I would say, of all the topwaters, a buzzbait gets the biggest strikes.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the noise and the annoyance of it.
Yeah.
And they are great for smallmouth too. They're great for pike too.
And you can get them in smaller sizes too. I'm trying to remember the brand of it. Is it Strike King?
Yep, they make
the small one,
the little baby one.
Yeah, and I tipped that with a Senko, whatever, with any plastic, and it's pretty light. It's only I think 3/16.
Yeah, they're light.
And so I cast it on spinning gear because it doesn't have a huge hook to power through the fish. And yeah, just a spinning gear, cast that in, and it's perfect for smallmouth because it's not as loud and clackety.
It's more subtle.
But it's still just as weedless, and it's a bit smaller presentation if you want that.
Exactly. And I feel like a buzzbait, it's one of the great lures to use when it's not slick calm. It can catch fish in slick calm, but sometimes you want a more subtle bait. But if there's a little bit of wind and there's a little bit of chop, I'm not saying big, chop, but if there's a little bit of chop, a buzzbait,
it has enough activity.
It has enough noise and activity to attract fish, even if if it's a little bit windy out.
Yeah.
So that's another really cool
thing
lure.
too that I held back on using buzzbaits for a long time is because I look at this when I was younger and I'd say that's huge. That's too big. I'm not going to fish that. What fish is going to be like, oh yes, this whole thing and try and eat it? That's not what happens.
Yeah.
So if you're concerned of this looks like a huge framed bait sitting on my tackle box, again, it's only that skirted part that they're going to be hitting. Yeah. That's the bait itself. This is just disturbance in the water above. Yeah.
And 100% if you're looking to get some buzz baits.
Why is it sticky?
Don't ask. It was sitting in my tackle box with a bunch of bait on top of it. I'd highly recommend checking out Blackfly Lures, another local company that makes buzz baits. And this one, I don't know if you can hear that. It actually really squeaks.
Yeah. The noisier, the better on those.
It's got like a metal grommet and it's just squeaking against it. And honestly, I don't know what it is. When they squeak, they catch.
Yep.
They're super annoying. All right. So let's go through the next one. And I thought we could talk about crawlers or jitterbugs.
I wasn't sure if you'd throw this in there.
No, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to talk about jitterbugs and crawlers. You have to.
I knew you talk about jitterbugs because they're awesome. But yeah, crawlers aren't used that much anymore.
No,
they're coming back from musky. Musky guys,
even bass guys, like the big swim bait crawlers, like the I-wing. Yeah, they're popular.
So they're coming back, but this was.
Describe it though. Like if you're listening to this, you don't know what a crawler is. This is the crazy crawler. This has been. This is
the original crawler. This is the crazy crawler by Hedden.
Yeah,
and it's got two hinged metal arms. It always reminded me of Anakin's pod racer, going back to like Star Wars again.
Nerd.
But it has those like big yellow flaps in the front, and as he's braking, they're like they open and close.
Okay.
So it always reminded me of that. So anyways, as this walks on top of the water, it will catch on one side and roll up, and then the water on this blade catches, pushes forward and it rolls to the other side, and then these blades just taking turns dipping into the water and like splashing water. And it's actually designed to mimic, I don't know if you know this, a bat in the water. It's like, okay, who's using a bat? But largemouth bass eat them at night.
Oh, they'll eat anything.
They're an awesome night bait.
It's a very unique bait.
The biggest flaw I have with the actual crawling baits themselves, because they have these moving parts, any weed whatsoever, anything small, you get the little like flower blossoms that come down and float on the top of the water. It just goes right into the corner. It's like, stops working.
Yeah, they are
they're finicky.
finicky. Yeah.
But the action when you got clear open water, these are really cool to throw.
100%. And I say we're kind of running short on time, so we're gonna go quick through this one. But one of the classic topwaters, and this is my dad's favorite, is the jitterbug.
Yep.
And I think anyone that fishes or has a family member or grandma or grandpa that fish, they probably have a jitterbug in their box. And that color Andrew has is the classic white belly, frog back. The one that I have here is the pure black.
Yep, I have a few of those.
For me, is one of my favorite nighttime baits.
Yep.
It's a bait. It's a cast and retrieve bait. You just cast it out, and you get that certain speed where you just hear, and it just has the best sound ever.
My first good walleye was on a black jitterbug, and I couldn't get it on a straight retrieve, so I actually started dead sticking it at night, and all you heard was the plop, 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 plop across the water, and I'd stop and just hear this like slight hook rattle. I'm like, what the heck is that? And I just set the hook on the sound, and then caught my first decent walleye on a black jitterbug.
I know my dad's caught walleye and jitterbugs as well in the Kawarthas. So the jitterbug is one of those baits. It's such a classic. If you don't own one and you fish for largemouth or smallmouth or even muskie, they have a muskie sized jitterbug. They are great, and they're so easy to use.
They're so fun to fish around the weed lines. Like service weeds, just cast it around in the channels and just pick them apart. They're fun.
100%. And I thought the last lure we could talk about, the last category, is prop baits. And prop baits are dear to my heart because I've slammed giant fish on them. I shouldn't even be telling you guys this, but yeah, they're like one of those things that I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I have a torpedo, the head and torpedo. Like that's probably one of the most original little prop
I still
baits.
use them. I still catch on them too.
Yeah. I have done very well, not on the torpedo myself, but on the X-Wrap prop.
Yeah.
I got this tip. It's more like it's a imitation like Devil's Horse. Like the classic, what was the original? The Devil's Horse.
The Smithwick's Devil's Horse, which was my first prop bait ever, and then a pike get me off.
So the Rapala X-Wrap prop, it's long. It almost looks like a jerk bait.
Yeah.
Except it has a prop on the front, like a little spinning propeller, and a counter-rotating prop on the back. It has 3 treble hooks and a feathered treble. And this bait for smallmouth and largemouth is fantastic. If you ever get those conditions where it's literally slick calm, like I said, you don't want to use something that's crazy aggressive. You cast this out, and you let it hit the water, and then you let all the rings just disappear. You just let the bait sit there. And at that point, generally, if you're fishing an area where you know there's fish are looking at it 100%.
Yep.
And then what you do is you just literally give it a tug, and those little blades, they're tiny. They're like, you just hear them like, and they literally just spit a little bit of water.
Yeah.
And the bait itself doesn't do anything. It just moves forward. And then you stop. You dead stick it. And then usually right then, boom, fish comes up and smacks it. And since there's 3 treble hooks with smallmouth, the hookup ratio is really good.
Yep.
And 2 Algonquin chips in a row, I caught the biggest largemouth on this bait. And I don't know what it is about it. It's just the subtleness of it, I guess, and the profile. It worked really good.
They've been around for ages. This is another old one. This is the skidder prop. So the Rapala has a skidder walk and a skidder
classic
prop.
That's a classic.
And this is like the old style. But they have the new ones too. They work really well still. And another one, a classic version of another bait, I don't have it out, is the headed wounded spook. So the one I have actually looks exactly like this, except the color pattern is it's on its side. The hooks are on the bottom then, and just has a prop on the front and back. And the same thing, you just pull it forward and it just through the water and stop. And on that one, it really clacks a lot, similar to not as loud as a buzzbait, but the older ones I find, they have a very like loud, because it's all metal on metal. There's no fancy bearings or nothing like that to make it spin super nice. So
it's
they're like
squeaky.
It makes a very different noise on the classic ones than you will on some of the new ones that have like another one Jesse has here.
Oh, I love this one. So
it's got the plastic props, which they spin super good.
I was very
skeptical.
skeptical.
They're a lot more quiet than
it's way more subtle.
A squeaky metal prop on something like this one here. which is basically just rattles because
Yeah.
it needs like constant draw to spin.
True. So the one that Andrew just handed me is I tried this one out. It worked great. So like I said before, the Rapala X-Rap prop, it's a long slender bait with props on it. And I was like, you know what? It's a little big. I want something a little more small and subtle. So I picked up this Berkeley Spin Bomb. It's the size 60. It's short. It's like 2 inches long.
Yeah.
But it's a fat profile.
It looks so good.
Yeah, and I got the frog color. I don't think it really matters. But it has 2 plastic blades. And it is small. You cast this out, just let it sit there. Same thing. You just pull it, and it's like... It just has the very subtle, just little spray.
And it's for those, like you said, those dead calm.
Dead quiet. These aren't going to work as well, as effectively if the water has some, movement to it, I find personally. But if you have those days where it's just dead calm, I don't know what it is. The fish cannot stand these things. They just smash them. Did well with that one too. But these are just some of our favorites that we've tried. There is tons. If you've ever gone to the fishing store and looked at the topwaters, there's hundreds of them. You could literally spend millions of dollars just trying them, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, those are some of the cool baits that we like. And it's bass season now, and actually me and Andrew are going out pretty soon on a trip. So we're hoping to smash some fish on some of these baits. And definitely check us out on Instagram if you don't already, because we're going to be posting all that stuff. We post stuff every day, fishing gear, techniques, humor, a little bit of everything. And again, we would like to thank Adam for donating 3 of these books. Again, this is the Mighty Smallmouth Catching Big Bass on Small Water. It's a good book. I'm not even just saying that. I look forward to
reading it because what I started in, it's... Again, because I grew up reading the Scientific Angler books, those old, green hardbound books.
Yeah,
they're so outdated, and there's not much. Like, there's so much information these days, but there's also nothing that's like really like a nice book to read again. That's actually up to date, modern. So it's nice to have something like this
book
because
just
it's
came out.
so condensed. It's on like one topic essentially of smallmouth bass in primarily rivers, and there's so much information. So you want to get good at something. If you have a cottage and it's on a river and you want to catch bass, like 100% buy this book. You're going to then be able to more effectively fish at your cottage, someplace you're going to be all the time.
I guarantee you will learn something from this book.
100%.
And like, look at it's full of pictures of him holding the tanks. I almost want to give up fishing now because this guy's just slamming. You know what, though? I have to say, though, Andrew's mustache is better than this guy's. No offense.
Sorry, Adam.
I'd like to thank Adam again for that. So, again, he's giving away 3 of these books. If you win, it would be a great book for your own collection.
Yep.
Or a great gift as well. But also, he's on Amazon as well. His book's available. So, again, that's all going to be in the show notes. If you'd like to buy a book. And if you do buy a book, make sure you mention that we sent you. Again, we don't get any kickbacks, but it is nice to know that these guys that are donating giveaways on this podcast, they're getting some, good exposure.
Some return for their cost themselves doing that.
Exactly. So anyway, we're going to talk about how to enter this giveaway in 1 second. But before then, no, we're going to talk about it right now.
I'm like, what else is there?
So to enter our giveaways, as usual, you have to follow us on Instagram. That is the only way to do it right now. We post a giveaway post on our Instagram feed. If you look through, you can find it, and it will tell you exactly and specifically how to enter. If you have any questions, just send us a direct message on Instagram, and we will get that set up for usually around Wednesday or Thursday. And the giveaways end on Friday every week. So if you don't get it in by then, you snooze, you lose. And then you'll have to buy the book instead of winning it. But again, we'd like to thank Adam. Definitely check him out on Instagram and YouTube. His account is called Say Doggy Fishing. We'll link everything down. And we would like to thank everyone for listening to me and Andrew babble again for another hour about fishing lures. If you enjoyed this, please give us a rating. Please review us on Podcast Spotify. What the heck is Spotify?
Don't ask. We'll get too many weird responses.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, give us a rating. We're actually a funny story about ratings. We've actually got a lot of really good ratings on Spotify, and they were all 5-star. We had like 85-star reviews, which is amazing. And then some guy gave us a 1-star review because he hates us.
If you don't like us, just stop listening. Don't rate us badly. Come on, people.
So please give us a good review so we can cancel out that dumb review. But anyway, thanks for listening. Next week we have a really cool episode, which Andrew's going to be the host of, which is all about frog fishing.
Oh yeah,
so stay tuned for that. You guys have
continuation of Top Waters.
Yeah, 100%. So you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.